Culture wars. We're all sick of them. But guess what? They're nothing new. You would get the impression there's something new. You get the impression that there's all of a sudden these things that people fight and bicker about. And in the past, they were concerned with important things. And that this is just a thing which is driving a wedge in society that's completely made up, right? Maybe it is. I don't know. The culture war we used to have was very specific. Let's go back to the 80s. And the culture war I'm talking about is snobs versus slobs, or you could say slobs versus snobs, whatever, right? I don't know how far this thing goes back. I mean, from the top of my head, I would say it goes back to maybe the play by, I think is it George Bernard Shaw? I believe it's George Bernard Shaw. If it's not, I'll put the correction there. Pygmalion. I think that may be an example of culture, of not culture war, but of the snobs versus slobs or slobs versus snobs dynamic. So what am I talking about, slobs versus snobs? It is just basically this conflict that occurs between the slobs, uncultured, uncouth, using coarse language, and the snobs, the people of etiquette and means. And it may not even be necessarily tied to wealth, but more times it is. I am going to end with an example of something where it doesn't necessarily, it is tied to wealth, but it's not as strong as you think. So if you watch 80s movies and probably 80s television, but let's focus on movies, there was an obsession with snobs versus slobs, or slobs versus snobs, whatever. I'm just going to say snobs versus slobs. There was an obsession with it. And it appeared so much in cinema in so many ways that we didn't even realize it. The classic, even before movie, would be which wasn't quite as antagonistic, it was for humor, was The Odd Couple. I think it was a Neil Simon play, right? And later on a television show. But the 80s cinema was clearly defined by snobs versus slobs. I'm not going to do an exhaustive list. I'm just going to go through a few and explain. So get it out of the way. Essentially, John Cusack started his early career as an actor being the slob and the snobs versus slobs battle. Better Off Dead, One Crazy Summer, if I remember, he was the slob, and then you had the snob, and you know he's competing for the respect of usually a girl, something like that. I think it was a girl. I know Better Off Dead, it was the cute French girl with the curly hair, but you know he's not as smart, he's not as charismatic, but he's likable. If you really think about it, Even Say Anything is a bit of a snobs versus slobs story. He's a slob, and he wants this girl who I don't know. I mean, it turns out the girl's mother, or not mother, her father is like a crook and goes to prison. Spoiler for Say Anything, but that's his conflict is with the snobbish girl. In that case, it may not be necessarily wealth snobbery, but she is kind of snobbish. She's, smarter than him and more. I mean, they're both high schoolers, but she's a valedictorian or whatever, right? That's entirely John Cusack's early career, was being the slob in the snobs versus slobs conflict. Revenge of the Nerds. The nerds are the slobs, right? You have the fraternity, which is the wealthy, cool guys. And then you have the nerds who are kind of gross. Like when you think about it, really like the jocks and the frat guy, like I don't know who the other frat is. The frat with Jefferson Darcy. And with John Goodman as the coach, whatever. They're jerks, right? But the nerds are just kind of gross and criminal. Like they one of them basically does something with a woman without her consent. One of them's always burping, which is they did the laugh. They're just kind of gross. They're like human garbage pail kids. but we're supposed to root for them, I guess. I think the one kind of not gross one, the two not gross ones may be the gay dude and then Anthony Edwards, is it Anthony Edwards? The guy who was later on in ER. He wasn't even in the second movie. Just to really show how gross the nerds are, they're not really nerds. They're just disgusting garbage pail people. And that's why at the end, Ogre ends up joining them. Not because Ogre's like especially studious or brilliant. He's just a disgusting garbage pail person like they are. Not necessarily a snobbish jerk, but a disgusting garbage pail person. And he joins the nerds because they're the slobs. Caddyshack. Caddyshack. That's the story of Caddyshack. First is Rodney Dangerfield, and then it's Jackie Mason. There's nothing else to say about that. One that may surprise people kind of is Karate Kid. At least the first Karate Kid movie. Johnny Lawrence is the snob. He's handsome. He's blonde. He has a nice car. And then Daniel LaRusso comes up in there from New Jersey with his Jersey accent, jerseying all over the place in beautiful Southern California, just being Jersey and kind of just injecting himself in Johnny and Johnny's relationship with his girlfriend. This is later explored in Cobra Kai. And what is Johnny's redemption arc? We find out, he becomes a slob. And then Daniel becomes the snob. So the snob versus slob dynamic continues ad infinitum. I guess that's the word, right? Penultimate example, Ghostbusters. How is Ghostbusters a snobs versus slobs story? Here's the funny thing about Ghostbusters, right? So all of these guys, with the exception of Winston Zeddemore, are academics, right? They all have PhDs, and it starts with them being a part of academia, doing research. But what we see them doing, we see them kind of doing things that the kind of, I guess, tweed jacket wearing academia you don't see them doing very often. You see them smoking cigarettes, making dick jokes, eating junk food, right? And the snob in this situation would be Walter Peck. Now, there's a whole libertarian plotline subtext to Ghostbusters, but Walter Peck is definitely the snob. He represents the establishment, while these four working class stiffs are just trying to get by. Snobs versus slobs. There you go. And the final example of the snobs versus slobs I'm going to give example would be, and now kind of follow me here, just hear me out, would be the first Back to the Future movie. So who's the snob and who's the slob? The slobs in this are the McFlys. Before Marty goes back and changes the timeline, and then the snobs would be them afterwards. And the funny thing is that, okay, so what happens after that? They're dressed better. They look cleaner. They look kind of grungy before he changes the timeline. But the funny thing is they live in the same house. They live in the same neighborhood. I guess the neighborhood's better. George McFly doesn't do the weird laugh he takes up for himself. But they basically become preppies. They become, or not preppies. This isn't Saved by the Bell. They become yuppies. They become the ultimate 80s snob. So like I said, that's not an exhaustive list, but I think we can all agree that the 80s were really obsessed with the snobs versus slobs war, conflict, debate. Which side would you land on? It would kind of depend. More times than not, with the few exceptions, people they like the slobs. Like I said, with a few exceptions there. Back to the Future, definitely pro snob in that case.